Okay. Hello and welcome to the August episode of the Shift Bookclub Live. I'm journalist and creator of The Shift, Sam Baker, and I'm here with the author of the genius literary supernatural crime thriller, How Many Genres Can You Get Into One Book? The Change, Kirsten Miller. Kirsten's the New York Times bestselling YA novelist whose books featuring feisty and kick-ass girls who take absolutely no shit have been massive hits in the States. The Change is her first adult novel. Super top line, it's the story of three women, Nessa, Jo, and Harriet, who come into their power quite literally when they hit the menopause, perimenopause, menopause. That's a whole other argument, really. I'll leave it to Kirsten to tell you more in a minute, but let's just say it's a raw, of finely tuned rage, sly, wry, and I've just listened to it again this afternoon. It's really bloody funny. It's been described as The Witches of Eastwick meets Big Little Lies, which is catnip. It's been optioned by Bruna Papandreou's Made Up Stories. So for context, if you don't know who she is, Bruna was Reese Witherspoon's production partner on the movie of Cheryl Strayed's Wild, and the first series of the smash hits Big Little Lies. So basically, that's your fantasy lineup, isn't it? Welcome, Kirsten. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Hang on a minute. I've just got. There we go. You're groundbreaking YA author. So what was it that made you want to make the move into grown-up books, for want of a better way of putting it?
Right. Well, I started my first book series was called Kiki Strike, and it was written for, I would say, the 12-year-old that I had once been. It was a story about 6 delinquent Girl Scouts who discover an underground city beneath Manhattan. And along the way, you learn.
I must read that.
Yeah, no, it's quite. I have to say, I'm quite fond of it to this day. It's absolutely insane. And at the end of every chapter, you learn how to perform certain skills like picking locks or being a master of disguise. And that came out in 2006, and I still get emails from women who read the book at the age of 12 or 13 or 30 and said it was their first feminist handbook. And I was always really proud of
brilliant.
that. Yeah. That always made me feel great that there was a generation of weird young girls like me who had found this book and had taken something away from it. So that was where I started, and I did a lot of books after that. I wrote a number of books with the actor Jason Segel, who's a lovely human being, and we had a wonderful partnership. And when I was done, I didn't know what I was going to do with myself. I thought, well, I know I want to continue writing, but I was feeling a bit burnt out and had lost a bit of the passion that I had. And I was working with an editor at Penguin at the time who suggested, which is not my current publisher is William Morrow, but this editor who was a very close friend of mine, she said, well, why don't you go back to what you loved, what inspired you in the first place? And that was really talking to girls and to women. So whereas I wrote my first book for my 12-year-old self, I wrote The Change for my 49-year-old self. Because I think that these are both really transitional periods in a woman's life. And I wanted to speak to women who were going through the same change that I was.
It really comes across like that. It really feels like you were writing so much stuff out that because I wrote The Shift in the first instance, kind of the same, but non-fiction, just for a book that would speak to the woman that I was when I went into perimenopause, and I didn't have a bloody clue what was going on, and it was just shit. So tell us a bit about the book. Tell us a bit about the story.
So there are 3 women who have reached a certain age, as they say, which I hate that phrase. And
it's so annoying, isn't it?
I hate that. I also hate middle age. There's so many phrases that I think we should just dump in the garbage. But
do you have a phrase that you do like?
Grown ass woman. Yes.
Grown ass woman. Okay. I'm just going to write that down.
That came from my ex-husband, who I am still very close to, and he said, I was like, I hate middle age. What am I gonna? He goes, why don't you just call yourself a grown-ass woman? And I thought, yes, that's exactly what I am. So, so 3 grown-ass women have reached a stage, so the stage that I was at when I was writing. So Nessa is her husband has passed away. Her 2 daughters have gone off to college, and her life has gotten very quiet, and so quiet that she realizes that she can hear the dead. Then there's Jo, who has been at war with her body for 30 years. And she has always felt like it was against her and trying to ambush her, as I think a lot of us feel at times. And she actually starts experiencing hot flashes a bit earlier than a lot of us do.
Yes, 39, is it?
Yeah. So I had a friend who did that too, and it was very, because these things are not on there's no calendar, and if you're not expecting them and you don't know what they are, they can be absolutely terrifying. And then you go to the doctor and you find out that it's just that you're on a little bit faster track than other people. But she starts developing hot flashes, and she feels like this is the final straw. She can't take it anymore. And then she realizes that she has the ability to channel all of that heat and rage and anger inside of her and do some pretty miraculous things.
God, if only.
Yes, I know, right? And then there's Harriet, who is an advertising not executive, she's in advertising, and she has just recently lost her job, and her husband has left her, and she disappears into her beautiful modern home, and all of her neighbors assume that when they don't see her for a while that she's been eaten by cats, but she hasn't. She's actually been inside, and she's undergoing a metamorphosis, and she has discovered that she can make nature do her bidding. And the 3 women come together, they find each other, and Nessa hears the voice of a young girl, who's a teenage girl who's been murdered, and they find the body and refuse to accept the official narrative behind the girl's death, and they go out to find her killer. So it is a mash up of genres. A lot of people have had some trouble. Sometimes people want to put a book in a box, and this isn't a book that you can put in a box very easily. It's got a lot of stuff in it.
Oh, they love to be able to put it in a box, don't they? They don't want it to straddle. But in a way, this is perfect because it doesn't straddle 2 genres, it straddles like 4.
Yeah.
So they have to just put it in fiction. Well, why can't they just put things in fiction? Did your publisher, when you delivered it, did you get that kind of thing from your publisher going, oh, can you just strip out that supernatural strand, or did they just embrace it?
No, I actually, I shopped the manuscripts it was finished, it was complete, and I chose an editor who was she was extremely enthusiastic about it. And I didn't choose her because she didn't want to change much, but I just chose her because I think that enthusiasm in any industry is the most powerful force that you can have behind you. And I really wanted somebody who believed in the book. And I knew that there were going to be a lot of people out there who wouldn't, but I found one who didn't. I think she didn't ask for any changes that I wasn't happy to make.
Did you get, I'm just asking this question because I really experienced this when I was selling my book. Did you get that kind of a load of sales directors saying, oh, middle-aged women, not sure?
No,
I mean grown-ass women, sorry.
Yes, so my agent and I, and she is a woman, she's older than I am, and I've been with her for 16 years, and she is a firecracker. And she told me from the get-go that this was not going to be a book for everybody. and that there were going to be a lot of passes on the book, but not to be discouraged, because there were going to be, she goes, there are going to be 3 or 4, maybe 5 women out there who see the potential in this book and really, really want to publish it. And that came to fruition. There were a lot of people who were just, no, thank you. Which I have to tell you, we don't want books for middle-aged women stuff is just absolute bullshit. It makes me so angry.
Yeah.
This is women over 40 or 25% of the population in the United States. And we buy everything. We are the #1 book consumers. We're the #1 car consumers. We're the #1 alcohol consumers. We're the #1 consumer of everything. And even if we're not the ones personally using it, we're the ones buying it. So this idea that, it's just, it absolutely, it makes me furious that we are not represented, that our needs and desires aren't being met. And also it's unbelievably stupid of corporations to behave in that fashion. They're leaving so much money on the table. I know I sound like an advertising person.
No, you don't. You sound like this is exactly how I felt when I've got this actually a chapter in my book about this, about the fact that you're literally, if you don't care about that bit of the market, fine, but think about the money that you're leaving there.
Oh, absolutely.
If that's all you care about, think about the money that you could be hoovering up.
Oh, it's absolutely. There's so much more that could be done that isn't. And I know women, I've seen study after study after study that says that women over 40 do not feel like they're represented because they aren't.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
statistic that you tell people 25% of the US population are women over 40, and they look at you like that you must have gotten the math wrong, or either that or you're having a stroke or something. Yeah. And the reason for that is that we aren't represented. You do not see us the way that you see other groups. And yet we're spending money. We're running the world in a lot of ways at this point, and we still have not, I think we haven't acknowledged the power that we have economically and creatively and culturally. And we still haven't been given the due for the credit for the power that we have. It's time.
I guess Harriet is the character really that embodies that the most. Isn't she the kind of the character who probably, if when she was younger, she looked up, she works in advertising, if she in her 30s, if she'd looked up, she'd probably kind of gone, where have all the women gone? Yes. But she probably didn't look up, because when you're in your 20s and 30s, you kind of don't really. That experience that she had in advertising of just being ignored and taking everybody taking her ideas and then not getting any credit for it. And then being sidelined in her late 40s. And replaced with a man who's only like 3 years younger than her.
I know. But he's the fresh new face, yes. Yeah, that happens all the time. This, men age out of advertising too, which is absolutely ridiculous, but they do so at a much later point in their careers. You rarely, I felt it up until I would say around 40, I could have gotten any job in advertising that I wanted. And then suddenly, you start talking to people about jobs, having these wonderful conversations with men your own age about, anything and everything. And then a few days later, you get a call back saying that you're too senior for the role.
Oh, yes.
A very senior role. And this is coming from a man your own age. And it's so unbelievable. It took me a while. It took me 2 or 3 of those calls to realize what was happening. I was like, oh, I've aged out of advertising. How about that?
Oh, it's like that. It is that, like, you're too senior, i.e. you're too expensive because you're a woman. It just drives me up. So is that what led you into writing? It's like you just got to a point in advertising where you're like, fuck this? Frank, I mean, that's
No,
my word, not yours, you know.
I started writing in my 30s. I mean, before I really realized that that was going to happen. And it was never, I never thought I would make any money writing. So it was never, it was just something that I did for fun for a very long time. But I'm glad that I did. It was very, in retrospect, it was very smart to have another career going at the same time, because I do know people who have been taken by surprise and are given the shove out the door when they're paying college tuition, when they're, you know, they're dealing with a lot of the big expenses that come with being in your late 40s and 50s. So I'm glad that and I wouldn't call it foresight, I would say it was more luck.
Yes. Yeah,
There's been a
totally.
lot of luck in my life.
So what were you going through yourself when you were writing? So you must have been writing it about 40, were you about 46, 47 when you were writing it?
Yeah, I think I started when I was 47, maybe 46, but it would have been the latter half of that year. What was I going through? I was really angry about everything that's in the book.
It does show, but it's funny angry as opposed to like,
oh yeah,
shouty angry.
I'm not I mean, come on, I'm not a screaming, shouting sort of person. I'm the person who tries to get your attention and tell you a story that will change your mind. That's why I was good at advertising. I'm interested in changing people's minds. I'm not interested in shouting them down. So you won't find me doing that, and I don't think it's effective. And I think that that's the way people like to do it these days, and it's counterproductive. So I was going through, you know, there's nothing in the book that I didn't borrow from either my life or the life of a woman who was very close to me, my sister, my friends, whatnot. I mean, there's not a single thing. I wanted to make sure that when I was giving examples of the kind of shit that women face in the work world, in their daily lives, and that I stayed as close as possible to real reality, to stories that I knew, to stories that I'd heard, because I didn't want anyone calling me out and saying something like this would never happen. I wanted stories that I could actually point to and say, well, it did. So everything in the book is based on something that came from my life or my loved ones' lives. And I know a lot of women in the same position I was in. I had two friends who had to sue for age discrimination when they were let go from jobs too. And the lawyer that represented was the same lawyer. One friend had to do it, and then another friend told me she was going to have to. So I got her the name of the same lawyer. And he was like, this is all of my business right now, is women in their late 40s and early 50s. Because this is it. He goes, and it's getting worse. And so, you know, there's that, there's, you know, being pushed aside from the work world, paying for men who don't deserve to be paid for. I mean, there was a lot going on. So I needed to get it all out. And so I sat down and started writing.
Did you enjoy it? Because the anger comes across, but it seems like you were having amazing fun.
Yeah, well, I was getting revenge. Okay, so
yeah.
there are actual people in this book that deserve a bit of a comeuppance, and they know who they are. And I know that they have the book. So it was great fun being able to do that in a way that they would know it was them, but nobody else would. It was awesome. It's great. Revenge is one of the best parts of writing.
It's like when you write someone and somebody phones you up and says, was that me? And you kind of think, no, because you're not that interesting. But in this case, they absolutely were.
Yeah. No, a lot of the advertising. So in the advertising chapter, the ad that Harriet is offended by is a real ad.
Oh my God, is it?
Yeah, I quit um I quit a major
Oh,
New York advertising agency over that exact ad. And I'm waiting for the two
Jesus.
gentlemen who created it to step forward and tell us that it was them. It was shocking. I remember being I could not for the life of me get them to kill that ad. And
And did they respond in that way that you just don't get the audience?
so this is the secret of advertising, is they don't give a shit about the audience.
No, totally.
Their only interest is winning awards, because that is a secondary payday for them. So these young men, and it's almost always young men, they come into the copywriters or art directors for ad agencies, and the people that they are writing ads for are their bosses, who end up being judges for these big awards, like the One Show and Cannes and all of these things, because you get money and raises and all of this stuff. So they
Oh.
shit like what a woman thinks about an ad. That's not even. So they weren't. That ad in the book was not written to sell iced tea. It was written to win awards, and so their true audience was a bunch of
But
55-year-old guys.
it wasn't even a good ad though. Surely it didn't win awards.
No. It ended up it ended up dying. It ended up dying in the end, but not because of any effort of mine. It was just, it flopped in focus groups. But I was ashamed that it went as far as it did.
Jane has just asked, do you really get fined for not mowing your lawn in the States?
Yes. So that's very funny. Yes, and this is, if you mention the letters HOA to Americans in the suburbs, a lot of them will lose several shades in their face, because it's they can be extremely, they're on top of everybody all the time. And they can foreclose on your house. They will fine you and fine you and fine you. And if you don't pay the fines, then they will put liens on your house. And it can and does in I wouldn't say many cases, but it is not uncommon for it to lead to foreclosure. So it's not every neighborhood, obviously, but if you live in a very nice suburb, outside of of a big city, the odds are that there is a homeowners association coming by to inspect your lawn on a regular basis. Yeah.
Oh my God, that's weird.
Yeah, it's pretty awful.
So weird.
So that part really that struck a chord with a lot of Americans, the HOA.
Yeah, I kind of think, I have seen it before, on the kind of like probably Desperate Housewives or whatever. Like to go back a bit, but I don't know. I think I just thought it was a dramatic device or something.
No, it's real.
Crazy. Oh my God.
It's real, and it depending on the community. They can get very, very, very strict. And but then again, these people choose to live in these communities. So.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I guess if you don't like it, you don't live there. But so tell us a bit about the community where you set it, Mattock.
So Mattock is it's never specific. Everybody knows that it's based on it's a town in Long Island, even though I never actually call it Long Island, because I wanted to try at least to keep it sort of open to interpretation, but everybody knows it's Long Island. It's the reason that I said it there was because I wanted a place not unlike, so I grew up in the mountains of North Carolina, and you might be surprised that we have this incredible dichotomy between we have super, super poor people because it's rural Appalachia, and then incredibly wealthy people because it's vacation land for rich people from Miami and Atlanta. So you have this unbelievable chasm between the very, very poor and very rich. And I wanted to speak to that. And so I set things around New York because I love New York. And the closest place that I knew of around New York and felt like I knew well enough to speak to was Long Island, where you have a similar situation, extreme poverty and extreme wealth in very close proximity. And I wanted to do that because I think that in this country and in many countries around the world, rich men get away with doing horrible things to poor women. And it is something, it's always been that way. It continues to be that way. And that's what I wanted to call attention to with the crime in this book.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of really nail that good victim, bad victim bullshit that still prevails every day.
Oh yeah,
in the news here. I mean, I'm sure there too. The kind of you know, the stereotypically attractive white girl goes missing. It's all over the front pages. Young black woman goes missing. Nothing.
It's less about the women of color it's especially indigenous women in this country. It is horrific. The things that happen to these women, and nobody pays attention to it at all. I would say that there's a really strong socioeconomic component to all of this, though, as well. If you look at the Jeffrey Epstein case, which you can see was an inspiration book, he abused largely young white girls who were from very disadvantaged homes. He lived in his mansion. They lived, 10 miles away in a trailer. And he got away with it for decades, hundreds, if not thousands of these girls that nobody gave a damn about. So I think that the poverty is a big issue, as well as ethnicity, with people just being considered disposable and tossed to the side, literally, as the girl in the book is tossed to the side of the road and left. And I find that it's horrifying. And I think that it's a very, very sad state of affairs when our society allows that to happen. And the Jeffrey Epstein case, for me personally, was unbelievably shocking because it had gone on for so long. R. Kelly, another, Bill Cosby as well. I mean, you could name a whole bunch of, these incredibly rich men who were using and abusing young women with absolute impunity for decades. And I just thought, it made me so mad. It's like, this is what they think of young girls. This is what they think of women. And I have a 13-year-old daughter who has just entered what I would consider the Bermuda Triangle of womanhood. And the ages between like 13 and 19, bad stuff happens to girls. And if I have any power, if I can make any change, I'd like to make the world a bit safer for them.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much talk and noise about, because youth, attractive equals young, youth equals beauty and fertility and all of that stuff, and there's so much, I hear so many women complaining about the fact that they're on the shelf and invisible and in many ways, but it seems to me that is the great blessing of perimenopause, is that you're no longer of interest. If you even were, which I never was because I was a ginger kid, but you know what I mean.
Gingers are great. I don't know. That's a UK thing.
Yes, it is a UK thing. I noticed that in the book. We don't have that
to the same extent in the US. So here's my thinking about that. I feel I know I'm very familiar with the invisible storyline. I was told that when I was 20, I'm going to say 23, an older woman that I worked with who was the grand old age of 38 at the time, told me that one day I would be invisible. And I remember thinking, no, I won't. What are you talking about? Like, I don't, like, it had nothing, I couldn't have cared less whether men continued to look at me. It was just sort of like, I'm not going to let that happen. It's just not going to happen. And I think that we've absorbed all of these stories from previous generations that just no longer fit our world or our lives.
Mm.
And the lives that our grandmothers led or our mothers are so vastly different from our own that to keep telling these stories that they told themselves is ridiculous. I mean, we're at a point where, 100 years ago, the average life expectancy for a woman was below 50 years old. So a lot of women, most women maybe, didn't even reach menopause. It wasn't something that was, the common experience that it is today. And we've had a few generations since then where we've been slowly working and fighting our way through schools and government and all of these institutions that had excluded us for so long. And this is really the first generation where we've had anything close to the kind of power that we deserve to have. I mean, we're still not equal by any stretch of the imagination, but we're getting there. And so for us to imagine that those stories that were told about previous generations still apply to us, and it's just ridiculous. We are the most powerful generation of women in the history of the world. And I don't think we've figured that out yet. I don't think we know. We in the United States, women right now are earning between 60 and 70% of college degrees and postgraduate degrees. We're a high percentage of the doctors and the lawyers and all of this. The world with this is, and yet we don't understand or accept that we have more power, that we have a say in things in a way that we didn't before, and that we can change this. And
I
so
think go on, sorry.
No, it's just, you need to wake up. That's the first step.
I think there is a definite sense that whilst, of course, patriarchal society, and we're not given the power, or, it's restricted, but also there is this like sense that we have to accept that we have to take it.
Yes.
And I kind of feel like we're almost like a sandwich generation between our parents. I don't know about you, but my mom and so many of the women I've spoken to, they're all like, oh, we just put up with it. We just shut up and got on with it.
Sure.
We're talking about menopause. And that younger women, millennials, they won't shut up about periods. They won't shut up about that. So I feel like we're the first generation who, I mean, when I went to university, it was something like 16% women.
Right.
And now, and like you're saying, now it's like 60% women. So the younger generation don't get that's the thing, because they're like, well, we're the majority here. And it feels like we were I hate this phrase, but the kind of so-called have it all generation. And I think that's why we're starting to talk about menopause, because we are like looking around and going, what the fuck? I'm not going to trot off and knit now, but we're still kind of got to learn from the younger women. And I love all the stuff in the book about periods, and Joe being called Carrie, and that kind of the shame around periods, and then that kind of final recognition. Because I don't know if you did this, but certainly I worked in mainly female offices most of my life, and I still shoved the tampon up my sleeve to go to the loo.
Absolutely.
It's like, we're all doing this here. We are all bleeding. Literally, there's only one person in this room who's not going to bleed. So why are we shoving the tampon up our sleeve?
Well, that's the whole thing. So there's still, I would say that the UK is a bit ahead of us in a lot of ways, but
maybe.
I know I'm very familiar in some ways, and others not. But in terms of menstruation and menopause, certainly we're still a little bit behind you guys. in terms of getting rid of the shame and the stigma surrounding these very ordinary transitions in a woman's life. And we're half the population. Having your period should be as ordinary and boring as brushing your teeth. And the same thing with menopause. You know, this idea that these are somehow things that we should keep secret or feel any sort of shame about. You know, why? And it's just, it goes back to the scene in one of the, you know, in the advertising chapter where one of the male copywriters, I think it's the creative director, is just like, you know, we don't want to see this stuff. We don't want to know what color it is, menstrual fluid, or where it comes from.
Yeah, the blue blood thing. I mean, it's only like last year or the year before that they stopped that, isn't it? I mean,
I think Australia actually went with red for either. Australia's really been out there with menstruation stuff for a long time. Bless them. But it's why make a little girl feel shitty about something that's happening to her body that has happened to half of everybody who's ever lived? Why? And I think that this generation is the one that's starting to ask these questions for the first time. But I really do see massive change coming with the millennials and with Gen Z. My daughter's generation is not going to put up with the stuff that we did.
Is Lucy based on your daughter?
Absolutely, 100%.
Oh my God, I love her.
Including the extremely foul mouth.
Well, maybe she has a foul mouth mother.
She does. But it's our private thing. Like, she doesn't do it in public. But it does drive her father absolutely insane. So that was a joke for him. But
yeah, I love her, and I love that she's got that energy and anger and everything that like little girls. I mean, she's kind of, what is she, 11?
she was 11 when I was, Lucy is 11, yes.
Lucy's 11.
My daughter was 11 when I was writing it. Now she's 13. So.
And it's I mean, I'm sure that, I don't know whether this was a thing for you or not, but I love the fact that she's there harnessing all that energy and power that, in fact, her mum is starting to learn to harness that, and that Harriet is really like got going on. And I just really hope, I mean, obviously Lucy's a character, but if she's based on your daughter, I really hope she doesn't lose it in the way that so many of us do when we go into teenage years.
Yep. Well, you know, I was thinking about this the other day because I just recently started running, and about 2 years ago, I started running, and I had never considered it before, ever. And when I was in high school, it wasn't something that I felt like I could do, because when I was in high school, there were no good sports bras, and running was actually physically painful for me. And I think that a lot of women of our generation and before, you know, there were so many roadblocks that you hit where there just wasn't, and it became, you know, where it's being shoved in your face that this is not a world for you. This is not a world that you should be participating in. This is not a world where you belong. And you step back. You know, it's the hiding your periods and your tampons. It's the horror of having a boy at school know what's going on with your body. The idea that your boobs might jiggle too much as you're running or be painful. There were just so many things that you hit, these obstacles that you hit, that just no longer exist for a young woman of my daughter's age. And so I hope very much, and I mean, that was one of the reasons that I wrote my first book for girls of that age. I really wanted to inoculate them against a lot of this crap that you deal with as a teenager that tends to destroy the moxie and the feistiness that you have as an 11-year-old. But I think that she's she's got a good chance of keeping that in a way that previous generations, you would have had to work really, really hard to keep it.
Yeah, and you wouldn't, and at that age, it's so important to belong and be popular, and it's impossible to do that if you were pushing back against all those things.
Yeah, yeah.
There's so many things I want to ask you that are probably from the last third of the book, and I can't because I'll get shouted at by everybody who hasn't quite
Yes.
finished it. Like, no spoilers.
I saw somebody yelling, "No spoilers!" Yes.
Yeah. But I just want to say this, and Jane, when you do finish it, you'll totally understand this. But can I just say, I love you for Juliet Rocker's last dish.
Yes, yes, yes.
I love that. That's all, Jane. I'm not going to say anymore. But I do. I absolutely love that. I gave a little whoop when I found that.
I do. So I believe that there is. The book has been called magical realism. It doesn't go as far as a lot of magical realism does, because I really do try to keep one foot very, very firmly planted in reality. And but I do believe that there's so much in the world that is magical that we take for granted. And I think that even something as simple as baking, right? An absolutely magical experience that is. The chemistry of it and the effects of it and the power that you have and you wield when you give somebody something that you've made. And so I think that there's a lot of things that women do on a daily basis that do have a real element of magic to them that we take for granted.
And they're just not valued because they're women's stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just looking at all my questions. There's so many from the very end that I can't do. When you were like building the three main characters, Jo and Nessa and Harriet, did you intentionally make them represent kind of different aspects, if you like, of the menopausal experience? With Jo, with it being very much about the body, and Harriet being a bit more about kind of sex and coming into yourself, and I love that whole wise woman thing, that kind of witch thing. And then Nessa just feels to me like she was always such a good girl.
Yes.
And she had those powers kind of thrust upon her, but she always all of them really all did the right thing, or tried to do the right thing according to the rules that they've been taught. But they do feel like, particularly Jo, I guess, and Harriet, they feel like they're I identify with bits of both of them, really. But that kind of, like you were saying about the body thing just now, it's like suddenly you're allowed to be strong, and suddenly your body becomes a thing that isn't this. Male pleasure doesn't sound right, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. It's yeah. So I don't think I didn't chart it out. Right? This is the menopause experience.
You didn't strip them out.
I want you to represent.
Yeah.
It just sort of fell into place. I mean, I saw Harriet I saw her experience as fundamentally being one of going back to nature, of going feral, and stripping away all of the rules of society, and refusing to see the world through anyone's eyes but her own, and behaving the way that she thinks is right, and doing the things that she thinks is right, as opposed to what she's always been told is right. So that was her kind of fundamental experience for me. And Jo was, I guess the impetus for that was I used to go to a gym about 10 years ago, and in Greenwich Village in Manhattan. And I don't know who this woman was, but every day at a certain time, this woman would come in, and she looked like Grace Poddington, right? She was gorgeous, and obviously somebody was incredibly chic. And she'd come in looking awesome. She'd come out in her clothes. She'd get on this elliptical. And I'd never seen anybody. There were times when I thought she was going to destroy that machine. But she was punching, and she was swearing, and I remember watching her and thinking, wow, she is mad as hell at somebody. And And I just, that all of that energy and all of that heat and all of that rage just seemed wasted. Like if you could put that to use, if you could focus that, if you could find a way to hook yourself up to the electrical grid, think of what you could do with that. And so that was the idea behind that. And then Nessa was really, I wanted a nod to my own Southern heritage. And, we have in the South, we have lots of stories. It pretty much like anybody from the South will tell you, like, there will be some weird story about the women in their family and the stuff.
Yeah.
So like in my family, it's believed that all the women can see ghosts. So there's always some sort of like wild tale. So I wanted her to reach a point in her life where she thought everything was over, that there was nothing for her, that life was just too quiet and too depressing and not worth going on. And then in that silence, hearing something that makes her realize that it's just the beginning. And so that was the experience that I wanted her to have. So it ended up being very, very different. But it's just sort of like, the process was very much like a bird building a nest. You steal a little piece of twine from here and a little tinsel from there, get little shiny bits, and eventually you weave it all together.
I mean, if you franchise Furious Fitness, I think you'd clean up.
I know, right? But it was also because Furious comes from the Furies, right?
Yeah.
So it's I thought that was one of those like clever little touches that only I would laugh at, which my book's going to be filled up with.
Oh God! And when Joe goes to the bank manager, oh my God, it's just like I've tried raising money from those men. Assholes, a lot of them. Assholes.
Once again, based almost directly on an experience that one of my best friends was having at that moment. So it's none of it was made up. It was all borrowed, occasionally robbed from someone.
Did you find, excuse me, did you find this easier, harder than writing YA?
I find the experience so much more pleasant. It's never easy, but it's so much more pleasant, so much more fulfilling when I'm writing something that I feel I have to say. And for a long time, I wasn't doing that. For a long time, I was telling stories, and that was fun. But I got away from telling the kind of stories that I really felt like I needed to tell. There's the Kiki Strike books were very much about imparting the wisdom that I had at that time in my life to the girl that I had been 25 years earlier. And so I was very passionate about that. There's another book that I wrote called How to Lead a Life of Crime, which I felt very passionately about as well. It's a real, I think it expresses my feelings about corporate America very,
Is that adult book?
It's technically YA, but it's I would say the only reason it's YA is because the characters are teenagers, but it's incredibly dark. It's as dark as any adult book out there, and it's one of my favorites. And then I enjoyed the time that I spent writing, other series, but this was something that I really wanted to say, and so the experience of doing it was wonderful. But it wasn't easy. I mean, as you know,
it's never easy. No. Well, you've managed to make the finished product look like you had the best time ever writing it.
That's great. There's nothing like settling scores.
Yeah. Jane has asked, said you mentioned earlier that you were burned out before you wrote this book.
Yes.
How did you kind of get over that and get your love of writing back?
I think that I didn't push it. I really, I set everything else aside, and I told myself that I was going to do this the way that I wanted to do it, and that I didn't give a damn if it sold. I didn't care if anybody liked it, that this was something that I was going to write for myself. And then if I showed it to my agent and she loved it, then we could go forward from there. But it was really important to me that I write it for myself. And that was the way that I was able to overcome that, because burnout is incredibly debilitating. And also I would say it was a weird time. I wrote this during COVID, so it wasn't the regular world. It was some offshoot of the regular world. So things were weird. I had this opportunity that presented itself to do my own thing, and I ran with it. That's what I'm proud of most of all, is that I had the courage to really do this at a moment where I could have easily gone broke.
Yeah.
If it hadn't turned out the way that it did. And I took the chance.
Are you going to write more adult fiction now?
Yes. So I want to live in this world a little bit longer. I'm not writing a sequel, but I want to have kind of a Marvel universe of middle-aged witches.
That's music to my ears.
So the next book is set in Matic, but it's not, Harriet will have a cameo, but it's a different set of women dealing with a different set of issues. But it's coming to, there's a sort of an uber plot to it all. There's a reason that all of these things are happening to women at this particular moment.
So have you got an arc that goes 3 books?
Yes. So I have 3. I have an arc that goes 3 books for now. But I also love going off on tangents. I love exploring paths that go off in different directions. If it's a world that I love and I'm happy to be in, I can just happily explore it endlessly. I feel the same way about the Kiki Strike books. That was a world that was just so rich and potent for me that I could have stayed there forever and just written books about these girls or their the ones who came after them.
I've got some questions that I normally ask at the end of the Shift podcast, but I think that you would give some really interesting answers. So I'm going to ask you them. So what's your emotional age?
I would say it fluctuates. I would say it's on some days it's 12 and on some days it's 40, 49. And it really does go back and forth. But I do feel like those transitional periods, I feel like these are times of great power in a woman's life. And those are, so I would say one of those on any given day. I do love, as my young adult editors know, I do enjoy a good poop joke. So.
I noticed, yeah. Do you think, and this is a bit conspiracy theory, but I'm going to ask anyway, do you think that one of the reasons that grown-ass women are sidelined and are still trying to be sidelined is because actually they are scared of us?
Yes. Oh, 100%. And I think that that's why all of this stuff is happening right now, particularly in the US with reproductive rights. So I think that we've gotten too powerful.
Yeah, it's just trying.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think that there are, I don't believe that men in general are out to get us. I think that's ridiculous. I do think that there is a small group of people who's always out to get you, and you should be very, very good at them. And I think that they would feel very comfortable having women go back to those traditional roles. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to strip women of their reproductive rights. So I think that's exactly what they're trying to do here, because they see us getting all of the college degrees. They see us being the doctors and the lawyers and the people in charge of things. And that's incredibly intimidating. And older women have always frightened the patriarchy. That's why they burned us. You reach a certain age in life and you know what you're doing. You have experience, you have wisdom that you've gathered on your own. And you no longer are at the whim of your body. Your children have been fed. You're not in danger of, being pregnant and dying every 9 months. And so that's a scary proposition, I think, for anyone who is keen to keep women in that traditional role.
Give us a book recommendation.
I'm sure you guys have all read it, but I love all of Angela Carter's books.
I love her.
Yeah, she's really crown powered. Yeah, absolutely. She's someone, I don't even think she lived to middle age. How old was she when she died in the night? I think she was maybe 40s.
Late 40s, I think. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure.
But I loved what she did with that, the sort of the playing. I love her brand of magical realism. I love how she doesn't go as far as the South Americans, but you still get the sense of the world being a really magical place, the real world being a magical place.
Do you have a favorite of hers?
The Bloody Chamber. I love The Bloody Chamber. In fact, it's sitting on my coffee table right now because I've been meaning to reread it.
Yeah, it's so good. I think I love that, but I also love Nights at the Circus and Wise Children.
Wise Children, yes.
Wise Children's brilliant. What advice would you give younger women?
I think my advice would be to know the power you have now. Really look around at the state of women and figure out where you stand and where your generation stands. And look forward to reaching this age. Look forward to your late 40s, your early 50s and beyond. Because this is the time when you are going to be able to take all of the wisdom and all of the experience that you've accumulated and really put it to use. What are you going to do with it? Because our generation is figuring things out, and I think we will change the world for the better. But the millennials and Gen Z have an opportunity to really do some amazing things if they put their mind to it, and don't just think about how to make life better for women around you, but how to do that for women around the world, because the world will be a much better place if women are free and have agency and are able to participate in the political process and are able to raise their children out of poverty. So think about that now. Start thinking about what you will do in the future, because you're going to have a great deal of power, and you should have something that you want to do. And you should.
That's good advice. So all your characters have superpowers. What would yours be?
Ass power. It's like my superpower is being able to sit on my butt until things get done. That's what Quincy Jones called it, ass power.
Ass power, yeah. Well, that is the best power to have if you're writing books.
It's the only power that matters. There are a lot of people with talent. There aren't a lot of people with ass power.
And last one, how many fucks do you give?
At this point, very few. I seriously, I mean, I care what people I admire think about me, and that's really about it. So I actually found myself, which it's gonna sound, because I am from the South, so like, you know, having a certain level of, you know, makeup and whatever on was important to me for a very long time. And yesterday I found myself blissfully wandering around Brooklyn with like nothing on, and like running into people. I ran into 3 people that I knew before I realized that, you know, I looked like a hobo. And
That's a hobo is my default look, so it's like
it's a good look. I'm embracing it.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. It's been absolutely brilliant to talk to you. Thanks very much. I'm afraid that is all we've got time for, everyone. Thank you.